Hello, I'm Tom Zuber. I'm the managing partner of Zuber Lawler, and I am a member of the editorial board of Dead Cat Live Cat. I'm here with Stefano Marani, and he is the CEO of Renergen, which is an exceedingly exciting company based in South Africa that is sitting on one of the world's most exciting supplies of helium. Stefano, welcome. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Tom, thank you very much for having me, and howdy to everyone listening.
Great. First, just for the sake of the audience, tell us about Renergen and how did you start the company?
So we're an emerging LNG and helium producer in South Africa, and it's this crazy story. Basically, we're mining an asteroid, for want of a better description, and it's now as a result got one of the richest concentrations of helium on the planet. And it was literally just blind luck. My partner and I wandered along and ended up acquiring some gas rights for $1 because the company was underwater and no one knew what it had. And then about a year later discovered that we were sitting on the richest grade of helium on the planet when we were in fact looking for natural gas. Now dual listed both in Johannesburg and Australia. So it's just been a hell of a ride.
So what does helium have to do with quantum computing? This is a quantum computing blog. And for those who may not be familiar with the essential role that helium plays in this emerging industry, could you please inform us?
First and foremost, it's about temperature. So if you look at the elements on the periodic table, there is literally only one element which will not solidify except under pressure, and that is helium. So you can take it down to a millionth of a Kelvin, of 1 degree Kelvin, and it will still remain liquid. And that's important because you need it as a refrigerant. And you need it as a refrigerant in order to create the qubits, in order to get to the right temperature. So you've got some kind of a superfluid in order to be able to entangle your elements and create the qubits, which is critical to quantum computing process. And more importantly, there's a new emerging form of quantum computing too, which instead of creating qubits out of subatomic particles, it actually entangles electrons on liquid helium, and this allows you to bring the temperature of the quantum computer up quite significantly. So this is holding quite a bit of promise. But either way, it doesn't matter which way you cut it, you need helium because you need it in liquid phase within 4 degrees of absolute zero.
Very good, thank you. And despite helium being the second most abundant element in the universe, helium is quite rare on Earth. Why is that?
It's rare because it's produced as a byproduct of radioactive decay. Now, if you take uranium-238, it takes about 2 billion years for half of the amount of uranium that you have to convert from uranium-238 to lead, and then it releases 8 helium atoms. So it's a very slow, gradual process. Now, the problem is that there isn't that much uranium on Earth. I mean, there's a lot, but by contrast, there isn't that much. And so the point is that you need uranium to have been in situ, sitting underneath a special cap in the presence of a hydrocarbon with a trap, and for it to be a particularly old piece of Earth. And there aren't that many old pieces of Earth. Most of the Earth has recycled through the mantle. Whereas by contrast, we've got mountain ranges here in South Africa that range back to 4.6 billion years. So it's difficult to find good concentrations of helium in the world.
Thank you, Stefano. And as of 2019, there were only 14 liquid helium production facilities in the world, in the entire world, with around 75% of the worldwide consumed helium produced in Qatar by an ExxonMobil facility in Wyoming and facilities owned by the U.S. Bureau of Land Management. How does Renergen's capacity fit into this worldwide picture?
So I'll start by sharing anecdotally. It's all about the grade. It's all about the concentration. So let's say, for instance, if you're going to go into a gold mining operation and you were to drill a hole and you came up, you measured the concentration of gold in grams per ton. 5 grams would be great. But obviously, if someone comes along and they've got 20 grams per ton, it would be better. It's a lower cost of production. Qatar produces helium at around 0.01% helium concentration in their natural gas. Russia, 0.1%. And so it gradually increases up to the United States, who are the global helium rock gods. And the United States is an aggregate of 0.35%. We clock in at 3.4%, with wells drilled up to 12%, making us the richest on the planet by a very, very large margin. So in terms of the ability to be able to extract, two things happen. One, we're a very low cost producer. Two, we can extract an inordinately large amount of helium whilst producing a very low carbon footprint, because there's so much less LNG coming out of the ground at the same time. To put that in context, you want to launch Falcon 9, one container load of helium for Falcon 9 is going to produce a carbon footprint of somewhere in the region of 489,000 tons of CO2. Whereas by contrast, we produce about 1,300 tons of CO2 equivalent. So concentration is everything. And yeah, ours is unparalleled.
That is truly incredible. Some incredible statistics. What are the biggest challenges that you've had, Stefano, in getting Renergen to this point? What are the biggest obstacles you've had to overcome?
Oh, educating people about what is helium. I mean, I'm pretty sure that if I had to ask the people listening into this, very, very few people would actually know what helium was used for. Hell, we didn't know what helium was used for when we discovered it in our field. It's yeah, obviously the first thing that springs to mind is party balloons in the Macy's parade. But you know, when you start going past the balloon market, you then realize that it's critical to MRIs. It's critical to both the manufacture and the use of MRIs. It's critical to space rockets. It's critical to nuclear power. It's also got a darker side, nuclear weapons and defense and all these other things. But basically, nuclear is critical to helium is critical to our way of life. I mean, you can't make cell phones, you can't make televisions, you can't make laptops. Basically, any form of electronics you can't make without helium. So all in all, it's an absolutely critical gas, and is running out. And this is the biggest problem. I mean, the BLM shut down because they ran out, and that story is even crazier than ours. Yeah. I mean, you can't even make the BLM story up. And you know, going around and telling investors when we were doing the roadshow and listing that we've got this incredible resource and helium is a scarce commodity, and they're all thinking about the last time that they bought their kids' party balloons, and they're thinking, really, what you smoking?
So where is Renergen, given all of that and the great spot in which it sits, going as a company? Where do you see it 2 years from now, and where do you see it 10 years from now?
So the exciting part is that we're turning on our first phase, which was financed by the US government through the DFC, the Developmental Financial Construction Company. That is going online end of this year, beginning of next, and they will be selling, it's a baby pilot plant. Yeah, cost us about 65 million US to build, somewhere around there. And that is a proof of concept, producing about 350 kilograms of helium per day, and the equivalent of about 75,000 liters of diesel in energy. It's LNG, but just to think of it in energy terms, it's about 75,000 liters of diesel equivalent. The bigger project we're planning on bringing online end of 23, beginning of 24, and that will be a very, very meaningful project. That will be a particularly large LNG plant, but as far as helium goes, there we're targeting a 5-ton per day plant. Now, 5 tons per day of helium is probably about 8 to 9% of the entire global consumption. So it's going to be one of the big plants globally.
Very ambitious, Stefano. And Stefano, how do you see your company, Renergen, fitting into this industry, this emerging industry, as quantum computers are increasingly commercialized?
So the long and the short of it is that there are I mean, you cannot operate quantum computers without helium. So chances are, if you're manufacturing or you're selling or you're buying quantum computers, you are essentially, all that you're really buying is a tiny little piece of technology that's minuscule in size, and you're buying a really large, expensive helium liquefier. That's pretty much all that you're really doing. And all of these things need to be fueled by helium. Of course, there are two main types of quantum technology. Yeah. And there are pros and cons to each of them. Both of them need helium, but one of them needs a much more special kind of helium, because not all helium is the same. And that more special kind of helium costs about $14 million US per kilogram. and it's not found on Earth. So whilst that technology is promising, it's also just about as promising as it is impossible to run in the first place. So whilst we can't produce that special kind of helium at $14 million per kilogram, believe me, I wish we could. We'll be supplying helium to either of those, because at the very base you need a lot of helium to run these things. So I don't see us selling directly to end users. We might be selling to the larger manufacturers like IBM and Google and all of the producers of these computers, and that's where we'd fit into the chain.
And so let's talk about time frame. When do you expect quantum computers to be commercialized? And I know that's a bit of speculation on everybody's part, but I'm curious to know what your answer is.
So that really depends on how long it takes for them to manage to get a long enough stabilized chain of qubits without decoherence decaying the amount of computing that these things can do. Yeah, the other big thing about quantum computing at the moment is that whilst they're incredibly fast and they're incredibly powerful, the types of calculations that they can do at this stage are still relatively limited. So it's kind of a cop-out of an answer. I think we've still got a way to go. I think that there's more than enough people investing time and energy and money into this technology. And obviously there's Moore's law that technology doubles and doubles every 18 months. I think we're probably between a half a decade to a decade away before this starts to become really commercially viable. Of course, at that point, when that does become the case, I do worry about the rate at which cryptocurrency is going to get mined, because if you can do it 100 million times faster than current mining operations on a very small capital outlay, it's going to destroy the value of crypto.
Indeed. Do you have any notion as to a particular country or countries in which quantum computers will first be commercialized? You think it's going to rise up in this part of the world as opposed to that part of the world?
It's early to say. I mean, right now it's a race between China and the US. That is really where the game is. I mean, Europe will dabble and Europe will make progress, but the race for first commercially available quantum computers is either going to be China or it's going to be the United States. And whilst Google has made fantastic strides, if you research what's been happening in China, they've gone on a completely different tack, and they're also starting to see some good results. Yeah. So it's neck and neck.
Very good. I agree with your assessment, obviously. And so what do you think of the potential market size for quantum computers? I'm talking commercial quantum computers going forward. How big a thing are we looking at here?
It really depends on it's a function of the cost relative to computing power. I mean, if these things really can process 100 million times faster, then you can afford to pay a significant premium. But then it's also got to be accurate. And the problem is that the minute that decoherence sets in and you start breaking down the ability to determine either spin or spatial, it really does lose its accuracy quite quickly. So I think it's going to take a while for them to stabilize. And then once they've managed to stabilize these quantumly entangled particles, it's really going to be a function of cost. And now we're talking about nanotechnology, because you've got to talk about, you're trying to get a machine that can basically take a reading on the level of quantum behavior of a particle, where you're talking about trillions of atoms in the tip of a pinhead. It's pretty impressive stuff.
Indeed. And so let's take it back to helium now, Stefano. Do you anticipate helium shortages as quantum computers rise to a commercial level of participation in the economy?
I don't think that quantum computers per se will necessarily lead to a helium shortage, just because I don't think that everyone is going to have a quantum computer in their backyard. It's just going to be too expensive. But do I predict that there will be helium shortages? I mean, we're living now through helium crisis 3.0. and we're going to have another one at the turn of this decade. The one at the turn of this decade is going to be particularly nasty, because with all of the climate change moves, there's a lot of restriction on exploration for new gas projects around the world, and you cannot get helium from sources without. Okay, let me caveat that. The majority of the world's helium comes from natural gas fields. There are some stranded little fields with a little bit of helium mixed in with nitrogen, but those are few and far between. The reserves are tiny, and there's no indication that you're going to find any meaningful helium that's going to replace the large reserves like Qatar, like Russia, like Labage, like all of these big fields that are producing a lot of helium and are running out. So I foresee that at the turn of this decade, especially with the level of rocketry and space exploration, the amount of helium that's getting consumed is insane. And it's the only commodity that is entirely incapable of being recycled. Once you use it, you lose it, and you never get it back.
Very good. And so when will we get a quantum computer cooled by Renergen helium?
So it depends on in our first shipments. Our first shipments leave our plant in January. So it all depends on where the company is buying its helium from. But it's entirely plausible that if our first shipments are going to the United States, it's entirely plausible that one of our containers might actually end up in one of these supercomputers. Chances are that by 2024, you'd be hard pressed not to find one that has our helium in it. I mean, if we're 8% of the global supply chain, and the majority of that will be going to the United States, it'll probably be about 20% of the United States' helium consumption. So it's pretty realistic that we're going to fill a supercomputer or more.
So I'm a futurist. I like thinking about things that don't exist yet because it's fun. So I'm going to ask you to do the same. Our personal quantum computers anywhere in our future, and I think going back to when we put a man on the moon, that was a room-sized computer, and personal computers were very far-fetched at the time. Steve Jobs, I guess, probably had a big say in changing that with his Apple computer, the initial version of that, the Apple IIe. So what are we looking at in terms of quantum computers? Will we see a personal quantum computer?
I would love to say a resounding yes, and as optimistic as I am, I think it would be amazing to see quantum computers at home. Unless we radically change the technology, though, there is definitely no ways that you can get helium down to minus 269 degrees Celsius without an inordinately large piece of technology. And whilst tech doubles every 18 months or so, the problem is that in 50 years, the helium liquefier has not gotten any smaller or any less power hungry. So it's, I think it would be pretty challenging to see them at home, unless of course, you're willing to just pay for inordinately new stores of liquid helium, and you could only turn the computer on as soon as they delivered another delivery of liquid helium to your house. But even that's pretty difficult.
So Stefano, let's take it back to Renergen, just your vision as a CEO for the company. What would you consider to be success? How would you define success for Renergen going forward?
It's not one event. It's just a series of continually kicking goals. And when we bought the field originally, no one knew how much gas was in there, and so the first set of goals that we set for ourselves was to determine how much gas there was, and then sign up a PPA. Or power purchase agreement. At the time, we didn't know there was helium, and then we discovered that there was helium. And so, if you're not a disruptor, then you are being disrupted. And so naturally, we thought, well, if we're going to produce power, the mechanics and the physics behind it are that you can't take the helium out of the gas if you're producing power. So it was a case of changing business streams very quickly to adapt to the changing circumstances. And so we then became an LNG producer and a helium producer. And then from there we had the next milestones, and that was obtaining funding for the project. And then we teamed up with the United States government, because helium is critical to United States national security. And success isn't one thing. Success is just the ability to continue to progress down the path and where necessary, having to change the path to surrounding circumstances so that you don't get disrupted. And for us, we've been relatively, on that metric, we've been relatively successful up to now. I mean, we bought the company for $1. Now we've got a market capitalization at this point of somewhere around 160 million US. That's still only 10% of its valuation. So there's a long way to go for us until we grow into the true valuation of the company. But I'd say we've been pretty successful up to date, and we'll continue to grow, and we'll continue to kick goals, and we set milestones, and we try and achieve those milestones on time. That's our definition. I mean, there's no one fixed end point at the end of it.
How about your exit strategy then? Do you have one? Do you want to pass this off to your kids? Do you want to do what, ride spaceships like Jeff Bezos?
No, I'm having too much fun. I will plan an exit strategy when I stop having fun.
Yeah. Okay. Great answer. So I'm a geeky lawyer, so I'm going to ask a geeky lawyer question. Too bad. How will all of this, quantum computers, and the rise of commercialized quantum computing, affect the law? In other words, what new laws, if any, do you think that we'll need to address the sheer power of quantum computers coupled with AI, right? So at some point, we'll have quantum computers coupled with AI, designing the next generation of quantum computers coupled with AI. And then we've got this big accelerating arc of returns, a la Raymond Kurzweil and his book, The Singularity is Near. So it seems to me that a lot of things are going to change. How will the law change? What new laws will be needed?
Yeah, that is an all-encompassing question, and the challenge over there, obviously, you can point to business, the business side of it.
Yeah.
But I think you're going to, if you take a step back and you look at the macro, the big picture at a global level, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Whatever inequality the world has right now is going to be exacerbated through quantum computing. And that's because whoever can spend the most on these things will have the most computing power and be able to process the most data, will be able to make the best decisions, and will be able to advance their economies faster, whether it's the private sector or the public sector. So from a legal perspective, whilst I can see that the law is already struggling to catch up with the internet, now you're going to put it on steroids, and you're going to speed computing up by 100 million times. Imagine, if you think back to just as little as 10, 15 years ago, Goldman Sachs was fined for running essentially a much faster computer than anyone else and closing out the little arbitrage gaps on the FTSE. That wasn't that long ago, and they weren't even using anything particularly special. They just happened to buy the property next door to the London Stock Exchange, which is why they got away with it.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about a paradigm shift where only a handful of companies and governments will ever have access to this. I think the law is going to change in so many ways, not only at a business perspective, but you're also going to have cognizance paid to what's going to happen at a macro level between governments. I mean, Malawi is never going to have a quantum computer. That's never going to happen. Nor is Madagascar. Nor will a number of other countries. Niger. I mean, the list goes on. Whereas by contrast, you're going to have so many of these things running around in the US, in China, with multiple different types of technology on the quantum side. I think this is just going to accelerate the gap between the have and the have-nots, and that in and of itself has some far-reaching legal consequences, which lawmakers are going to need to think about.
Indeed, exciting times, but also we've got to also keep our eye on this thing, because it's going to introduce some new problems that will have to be addressed to go along with all the excitement. Now I have the most important question, the one I've been waiting to ask. What is your favorite sci-fi movie and why?
That's a great one. So I'm probably going to go with the Fifth Element.
Yeah.
And as cheesy as a film as it is, and I mean, I could have gone with Star Wars. I could have gone with as cheesy as the Fifth Element was. How wrong can you go with Mila Jovovich and Bruce Willis in a film together? I mean, really.
Can't argue with that. Stefano, great answer and a great end to what was for me a very informative and entertaining interview. Thank you. Congratulations on all the success, and I look forward to seeing where Renergen takes the entire world through quantum computing and everything else you're doing. Thank you.
Tom, thank you. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Appreciate it. Bye.